What are the best areas to invest in real estate during this crisis? That's the topic for today's episode, and without further ado, let's dive in. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode. For those who are tuning in for the first time, this is your channel for real estate education. So today's episode is actually a very special one. I debated whether I wanted to share and create this episode for my YouTube channel or just simply keep it strictly to my group of students who invested in the Real Estate Nova program. But at the end of the day, I wanted to set an example for my students that they should help out other people in need and they should share their information, because at the end of the day, sharing is caring. So I have prepared a great class for you, and without further ado, let's just dive into my computer and I will see you inside. Okay, and we're now inside of my computer. So just to give you a bit of a heads up as to how we're actually going to walk you through this class. So this class is actually divided into three parts, right? So we're going to look into the allocation of funds that have 3.5 billion of above per state, right? And if you're wondering how did I come up with that 3.5, you will get to see eventually and a little bit as to why that was, let's say, so to speak, the magic number. And then after that, we're going to look into the states with rainy funds, right? And then lastly, we're going to look into the landlord friendly states, so to speak. Now, you might probably be wondering if this is the magic formula to invest in every single situation, in every single instance. It is not. I actually created this class due to everything that has been going on due to the pandemic. A lot of people have been reaching out to me, asking me questions regarding real estate investing. They want to know whether this is the right timing to invest or whether they should wait for the economy to get better. And like I mentioned in multiple episodes in the past, and then also in multiple lives, there's always an opportunity out there, even in time of crisis. All that matters is that you adjust to what the circumstances are and just simply have a plan of action and be prepared to tackle your plan and invest in an effective way. So this episode in particular was actually created for those who are interested in investing in time of crisis. And I'm talking about this crisis in particular, the pandemic that was caused due to the virus, right? And a lot of you might probably be wondering, okay, how do I know things are going to make sense in terms of real estate investing? And we're going to tackle that in a little bit. So without further ado, let's just dive into the research part of it. So the first article that we're going to check out, it's one from the taxfoundation.org. And don't worry, I'm going to leave you the link down in the description below. And this article is actually a very resourceful one because it talks about the state and local funding allocation by the CARES Act, right? And how does that work, right? So the way the funding is actually allocated per state is that it's determined by the amount of people that live there, right? By population. And if you're wondering why, well, just think of it this way, right? The higher the amount of people, the higher the demands, the higher the need. So the allocation of fundings need to be distributed accordingly in order to better satisfy or in this case, meet everyone's needs, right? So the way things are allocated, let's say we have this act that was passed in late March, right? And then fundings are actually allocated at the state level. Once those states, they receive a certain amount, whatever amount is allocated to them, then within that state, those funds need to be distributed locally as well. And the way the local distribution works is by population, once again, and the counties that have 500,000 people or above are the ones that are going to receive the biggest chunk of it, right? So let's assume we have a certain amount of counties that meet that criteria. They're going to receive all of that funding. And then after that, whatever is left is distributed to all the other counties out there within that state. So a good example that they actually utilize here is Ohio, right? So Ohio has an allocation of, let's say here, $4.53 billion, and they have a state population of 11.69 million people. And 4.44 million people live within the 5 eligible counties of 500,000 people or above, right? And 1.72 billion is associated with that share of the population. So these counties, they can claim 45% or 775 million of this total. And then the state will, pretty much keep whatever's what's left of it, right? That's in a nutshell. And to give you a better vision of how things are allocated, here is an illustration, right? So you can see here, Ohio allocation, $4.53 million. And then here are the top 5 counties that I mentioned earlier that had at least 500 people. So you have Franklin County, you have Cuyahoga County. Hopefully I'm not butchering the names. You have Halmington here, Summit, and then Montgomery County. And then out of this fundings that is actually distributed, part of it, it's going to go to the straight distribution. And then the other component of it, it's going to go to the localities. And the remaining funds right here is actually included in the distribution, right? So that's just to give you a general sense of how the funding is distributed. And why do you need to know that? It is important because you need to know which states still can meet demand, right? And now you're probably wondering, okay, why is this important? What do I care how these fundings are distributed? Well, because first, you need to understand what's going on locally with the economy. You do not want to go ahead and invest in an area where there are no jobs, where there are no demands of rental. So the number one criteria that you need to look into is, okay, one is the population, because the more people are in an area, that means the higher the demand for rentals. And I know it sounds counterintuitive. A lot of you might probably be thinking, well, this is a tough time. Why will people want to move out? And things don't necessarily work that way. So typically, the months with the highest, let's say, real estate activity, so to speak, are usually the months of April all the way to September, and sometimes even pushing it to October. So starting in April is what a lot of real estate investors call the spring months or the spring times. And this is the time of the year where people either usually start buying properties, selling properties, or just simply moving, right? Because the sun is out, the weather gets warmer for those who actually live up north. And if you're someone who's currently renting, right, the way it typically works with leases is that people will have to give a notice to the landlords. We're talking about maybe 30 days in advance, 2 months, sometimes even 90 days in advance. Depending on how the contract is actually written, you do have to let your landlord know in advance that you're no longer going to be renting in that space, right? So what happens behind the scene, which is something that you probably don't get to see much, is that they are starting to look for people. They're starting to do showings. They're starting to get the property rent ready, depending on the state that you're living in. And there's a high likelihood that perhaps that particular space has been already rented out to someone else, and you will need to move out, right? This is not about the landlord wanting to put you out in the street. It's more about a contractual obligation, right? So your contractual obligation ended because that's what a lease is for. And then they had extended a contractual obligation to another tenant who is getting ready to move into that space. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of moving pieces that happen around. So that means that if we're having a higher percentage of funds allocated in certain areas, things are going to hopefully continue to move as normal, right? So the fundings are not just to help people, right? So the funding is, yes, is to cover for unemployment, but at the same time, the fundings that each and one of those states are receiving is to also cover infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I'm talking about transportation, assistance for children and families. We're talking about education. We're talking about Federal Reserve loans that are actually out there to inject money towards the economy, and other programs that are meant to provide assistance to the people, right? So this is very different than 2008, where a crisis hit and the government came in and bailed out the banks. That doesn't work out this way. The government is here to help the people. They are offering a stimulus to help the people. They are offering money to help small businesses because they can't just simply let the infrastructure go down. And I know that you have heard a lot about people losing their jobs. We have to keep things into perspective. The people are losing their jobs, and it's definitely something that is very unfortunate, but the group of people or the population that it's currently losing their job are people who are working in retail. So we're talking about, let's say, the Gap, or we're talking about malls, we're talking about waiters or bartenders. It's in general retail and the type of service that requires you to be present. But the infrastructure cannot shut down. That means the transportation cannot shut down. Let's say, for example, the New York City subway cannot shut down because people still need to move around and get to their jobs. There are still businesses that are open because they're deemed essential. Same thing for nurses who need to get to the hospitals and still take care of people that are in need of assistance. So the infrastructure in itself has not shut down, which means that those workers are going to continue to receive their paycheck in order to push the economy and keep it from going, right? So now that you have a better understanding of the correlation between the population and the amount of funding that goes into each state, we're going to go into the second part of this video, which is learning about the states that have reserve funds or rainy funds. And here we are. This is another article by the taxfoundation.org. And I find this to be, once again, an excellent one because it gives you an excellent illustration as to how each state is doing in terms of reserve funds, right? Now, why is this important for you to understand? So let me just scroll up a little bit more, and here we go. It is important for you to understand how the states are doing in terms of rainy funds or in terms of reserve funds, because even though they're getting assistance from the CARES Act and the government is providing them with assistance, you need to make sure that that state can still manage to basically keep running while the funds get here. And I'm sure you've seen this in the news. Even if the funding gets approved, it doesn't mean the money is going to get to those states overnight. Some states could take longer than others depending on how they're running. I mean, the same thing is happening to you as an individual with the $1,200 stimulus, right? First, the act was approved on March 27, and eventually we are now in the middle of April, and we're still waiting for the funding to get to our checking account. So it is very important to understand how the states are actually doing, how are they managing to stand on their feet and keep running in the meantime until the government assistance, or in this case, the CARES Act money, gets to their state so they can continue with their infrastructure and running all the operations as they normally should be doing. So here is an illustration, once again, of how each state is doing with their rainy funds or their reserve funds, and it goes from the highest point in yellow all the way to the red, which is basically the states with the lowest amount of reserve funds available. And as you can see, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, and Hawaii are basically not in their best position as possible. But then you will see other states right here like California, Oregon, Wyoming. We have Texas, Georgia that are doing pretty good. And we have some states that are kind of like in the middle. They're doing okay. They're not the worst, but they're not the best either. So Ohio here, for example, is one of them. We also have Colorado. We have Arizona right here. So it's important for you to understand that as well. Now you are getting a sense of how things are looking, right? First of all, it's important to see, okay, which state is getting the highest amount of allocation as possible, because you want to make sure that the population is taken care of. And you also want to make sure that you have enough population so that you know that there's demand out there for rentals, right? At least. And of course, enough demand for buyers as well. And now that you understand that, then you're going to move along and you're going to check, okay, which state has the healthiest amount of reserve funds available for all the operations to continue running as usual. So that way the entire operation is pretty much seamless, right? Now that you know that, then you're going to go onto Google, or just simply going to do a quick search as to what are the top, let's say, landlord-friendly states. And I've actually had two articles right here. One is by rooftop.com, and I'm going to quickly zoom in so you can get a better sense of how the states are doing in terms of landlord friendliness, so to speak. And here is the criteria that the author used, right? So we're talking about the eviction process, we're talking about property taxes, rent control, and then other rules. And as you scroll down through the list, you're going to see states like Indiana, you're going to see states like Georgia on the list as well. And as you scroll down, you'll see Kentucky, and then you will see Texas, in the equation in Arizona, right? There are other articles out there, but the information is pretty consistent. So there's here an article from Mashvisor.com, and it lists the 6 most landlord-friendly states in 2020. And then their criteria is based on property taxes, legislation and licenses, rent control, and the eviction process. And we have Alabama, which is one of the states that I invest in. And we have Arizona again here in the list. We have Florida, which is also another area where I invest. There's Illinois in here. So all in all, the states, they sort of overlap. And remember, these are articles that are written by people, which means their perception of things can vary, but overall, the number of states that are landlord friendly, they sort of overlap. So the list, it's pretty consistent across the board. Now that we have gotten that information, what we're going to do now, it's basically build up a list just like the one that you see here and make sure that all 3 criteria are checking, right? So we want to look into the CARES Act allocation, meaning any state that has $3.5 billion. We want to make sure that the states that have reserve funds also check in. And we also want to look into the landlord-friendly states. And all 3 criteria, they will have to meet. In fact, I just remember I never walked you through the allocation of funds and why I decided to come up with the 3.5 billion. So let's just get out of here and go straight into the article once again. And here we are, and I'm sure you remember this table, this illustration right here. And as you keep scrolling down this article, then you're going to see the allocation of funding. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to zoom in once again so you can better see the numbers. So you have Alabama 1.9, Alaska 1.25, Arizona we have a 2.82, and as you keep scrolling down, Arkansas 1.25, California 15, we have Colorado with 2, and as you can see, as you scroll down, you see lots and lots of 1s and 1.2s, and then you have a couple of states here and there with a higher amount of allocation, and that eventually led to an average, and that's how I came up with this 3.5 number. Now, I created this table for you to take a look at it, and now you see this list right here. So California has a good allocation of 15 billion. We have Florida with 8.3 billion, Illinois with 4.9, Georgia 4.12, New York 7.5, Michigan with 4, North Carolina with 4 billion, Ohio with 4.5, Pennsylvania with 5 billion, and then Texas with 11 billion. Now, when you're looking into the map that I show you, the heat map with the reds and the yellows, you're going to notice that only 4 states are in the yellow zone that met the criteria of having enough reserve funds. And those are California, Georgia, Michigan, and Texas. And Ohio, I put an equal sign of it because they're kind of like in the neutral, right? They're not doing horrible, but they're not being the best either. And then towards the right, then you're going to see the list of landlord-friendly states. And now you will see that only 2 states completely met that criteria. And if you're liking this episode so far, do not forget to hit the like button here so that you can help this episode rank and help other people looking for information of this kind. Now you can see that out of this entire list of states, they are a total of only 2 states that completely met that criteria. One is Georgia and one is Texas. This goes to say that investing in real estate has a lot going into it. Investing in real estate is not about just simply going into Zillow and looking at pretty pictures and making sure that the house is looking pretty in order for you to invest, right? A lot goes into it. Understanding legislation, understanding what's happening with the economy, understanding what's happening locally as well. So there is a big amount of research that is going into it. And this is just a part of it. And now that you got that understanding, we're going to get out of this presentation and go back into that listing of states with fundings. And here we are. And now what we're going to do is to, let's say, for example, look at Georgia, which was one of the quote unquote winning states for real estate investing. And so we're going to scroll down to Georgia. And here is the allocation that goes into Georgia, right? So they have 4.2 billion, just rounding it up. And these are the allocations by county. So we have Cobb County, DeKalb, Fulton, and Gwinnett County. Hopefully I'm not butchering the name. And then out of all of this allocation, whatever's left of it, it's going to go straight into the state. Now, you might probably be wondering, okay, that's great, but what's next, right? So what we're going to do is just to do a quick search, a quick demonstration, and we're going to look into, let's say, DeKalb County right here. So what we're going to do is to go straight into Google Maps. And once we are in Google Map, all we got to do is just to simply type in DeKalb County, just like we learned right here, right? And get a sense of the cities that are within that county. So we have the map right here, and this is the county. And then we have multiple cities right here. We have Dunwoody, Doraville, Embry Hills. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. We have Tucker, Stone Mountain, Reading, Lithonia right here. And now what we're going to do is just to simply get a sense of what's in the vicinity, right? So we're going to go into Zillow just to simply look at different properties out there, just to get a sense of what it looks like. And what we're simply going to do in Zillow is just do a quick search of different properties that are in the area. So we're going to do Lithonia, Georgia, which once again was one of the cities that appeared here. So Lithonia right here, and there you go. You have a bunch of search, a bunch of houses that are available, and here is where your search start. And basically what you're going to do is everything that I taught in my webinar. So for those who already attended the webinar, you already know what to do. You're going to go ahead and do a study of the area. You're going to take a look into what the school systems are. You're going to do a regional search of what the area comprises of. So we're talking about the school system, we're talking about crime, we're talking about job demands and stuff like that, so you know what to do. Or if you haven't signed up to the webinar, I have no clue what I'm talking about, let me tell you that all you got to do is just to simply go into the description box down below or the comment section, and you will find a link to a webinar free of charge, and you can pretty much just sign up for it. The webinar, once again, is free of charge. All you have to do is to block at least 2.5 hours of your time, because as you can see in this episode, you definitely learned a lot of information, and I guarantee you that you're going to learn a lot more in the webinar. And whatever you learn in that webinar is going to complement everything you just learned today in this particular episode. And this is pretty much where the class starts. This is actually part 1 of the class. There is a second part where I'm going to go ahead and simply just walk my students through it, those who invested in the Real Estate Nova program. And if you are interested in being part of the Real Estate Nova, towards the end of the webinar, you will also receive a offer with next steps, and then you will get to decide whether you want to be part of the community of Real Estate Nova or just simply pass on the good offer and just continue doing what you normally do. And that's all I have for this screen, and I'll see you guys back outside. And that's it. That's all I have to share with you today. Hopefully you enjoyed this class and you find a lot of value in it. And if you want to learn more about investing in real estate the right way and find out more information about how you can do that properly, not only studying in real estate investing, but at the same time be able to expand your real estate portfolio, I have created a free webinar for you to check out, and the link, it's right here. You can see it right now or under the description below, and you can sign up for it at any time. Just make sure that when you do, you have blocked out at least 2.5 hours of your time. I know it sounds like it's a long time, but we have a lot of information to cover, and it will probably won't even feel like it's been 2.5 hours. So I will see you in the webinar, and without further ado, take care. Bye-bye.